Welcome back, everybody, to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. It's been a while since our last episode, almost 3 months ago. We'd planned to take some time off in the summer. Early August, I got COVID and had a cough that lingered for several weeks after. And finally now that is resolved, and we are back with the season upon us. Good to be back on the show. With us this week, former Inside the Hall writer, now of the Indy Star, Tyler Tachman is here. Tyler, why did you have to leave us? Just kidding.
That's a tough way to come in to the podcast. That's really tough. You
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. We're very excited for what you're doing now at the Indy Star. I think it's a great opportunity for you. As I've told you, you did a really great job at Inside the Hall for the last 2 years. I know the readers miss reading your stuff, but they're also following you now at your new home. What's the transition? Just curious, what's the transition been like? And obviously you're covering football right now. What's that been like so far for you? And just in general, you're getting a chance to cover some other IU sports in addition to football and basketball.
Yeah, I enjoy it so far. Miss being at Inside the Hall, but like the opportunities that I've been given at the Indy Star. Football has been kind of up and down if you've been following it. So, I covered it last season, and at least the first 3 games were a little bit more exciting than last season and the start to that. But no, I've enjoyed it, and I'm actually covering a soccer game tonight. So just to be able to kind of diversify my coverage and just have more flexibility, be able to cover different things, different stories is something that I've definitely enjoyed.
One of the great things that we've been able to do, having students write for the site over a long period of time. Last year, Tyler and Grace Ibarra did a great job, but they were great in helping recommend 2 new students that have joined the staff this year, writing for the site, Amanda Foster and William McDermott. So we're excited to have them aboard, and we'll continue to follow Tyler's work and have him here on Podcast on the Brink from time to time. Tyler, the reason I wanted to have you on, I've probably had you on the podcast as much as anybody the last 2 years talking about Indiana basketball. There's finally a season now upon us where there's expectations for this program to be more than a middle of the pack Big Ten team. There's been some preseason rankings that have had the Hoosiers as high as number 6. I think that's a little bit high for based on what my perspective is. But I'm just curious, just how surprised are you at how high Indiana is kind of being viewed nationally entering this season, and realistically, what are your expectations for this team going into Mike Woodson's second year in Bloomington?
Yeah, the expectations piece was something, that really intrigued me. It was actually something I wrote about. I just feel like it's a fascinating dynamic. You have that historically, this is a program that is used to dealing with high expectations. When Mike Woodson played at IU, I think it was 3 of the 4 years he played there, they were ranked in the preseason top 10. But, in the more immediate scope, this is a program that hasn't really dealt with expectations like this. And more specific to this roster, this is a roster that really hasn't dealt with expectations of quite like, at least external expectations quite like this. So I think the dynamic of trying to manage those expectations, through the highs and lows, especially just given how difficult Indiana's schedule is and the fact that, some of the fan base, if Indiana gets off to a tough start and just maybe because of the schedule, doesn't mean their season is totally dead in the water. I think when I look at those 4 non-conference games early in the season, North Carolina, Xavier, Arizona, and Kansas, I think it's a massive win if Indiana goes 2-2 in those games. But let's say Indiana goes 1-3, or if they lose all 4 of them, I think that, obviously right then there might be some panic from the fan base of is Indiana as good as we thought or hoped they were going to be? But when I think you'll see those games really pay off, if they do pay off, is in March, right? Because you're getting that big time game, that big time experience early in the season. and maybe they don't get off to a great start, but that could pay off down the road in March when, you hope everything comes together. And now you're playing games in March that you had already played in, those type of atmospheres in November. So look, I know, I think you've said it too in the past, like, um, you don't trust Indiana to win the Big Ten, even though they might be considered one of the favorites. And, I would agree with that. I just think there's too many question marks, right now in terms of shooting. Can Jalen Hood-Schifino be a guy that Indiana can really rely on a consistent basis? But, with that being said, I think also just given the way the Big Ten has been made up this season with so much talent leaving, that Indiana, has the most continuity. It seems like at least they have the most togetherness from last season, at least perception wise. So, I think in a normal year, Indiana might be top two or three, 2, 3, 4 in the Big Ten. But just given the talent this year, they might be in the 1, 1, 2 slot. But yeah, that's just kind of how I see it. I know that's a lot to unpack, but curious to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways of looking at it, and I think you make a lot of good points. The first way, if you want to look at Indiana as a Big Ten favorite, I think you can support that opinion by saying this is a team that pretty much brought back all of its relevant players from last year. Rob Finney and Parker Stewart obviously had roles on last season's team, but not to the point where those guys are irreplaceable by any stretch of the imagination. So they bring back all this production. They were a tournament team last year. They bring back a guy in Trayce Jackson-Davis who's going to be in the conversation for Big Ten Player of the Year if things go well. That's kind of the argument for them being picked at or near the top of the Big Ten. I would say the argument against that is, for those of us who have followed this program, and pretty much everyone listening to this podcast is somebody that watches Indiana basketball religiously. We saw last season a team that finished 48th in the country in the Ken Palm rankings. They had to come back from a 17-point second half deficit against Michigan to kind of pull the season back from being a disaster. Then they beat Illinois in the Big Ten tournament, and despite that, they still were just a play-in team in the tournament. And then they did beat Wyoming in the first four, but they played St. Mary's and were beat handily in the first round of the NCAA tournament. So, and like you said, in a regular year, I don't think this is a team we're talking about as a Big Ten favorite, but I think it's more of but it's not Indiana's fault that it's going to be a down year in the Big Ten. The league is what it is from a talent perspective coming into the season. A lot of guys were lost early to the NBA. Some key guys graduated at various schools. And so I think the opportunity, no matter what, to win a Big Ten championship is one that you have to take advantage of. And the interesting thing to me is a lot of coaches in the preseason, depending on who you listen to around the country, like to downplay expectations. And, they like to just kind of, take the pressure off their players. Mike Woodson, his approach has been completely different. If you listen to him at Indiana's media day last month, he basically said, if you don't want those type of expectations, you shouldn't be here. He wants to win Big Ten championships. He wants to compete for national championship. And he's talking about competing for a national championship, and Indiana hasn't been past the Sweet 16 since 2002. So that's a pretty big leap for this program. Do you like Mike Woodson just being blunt and saying, this is what we want to do this season? I mean, obviously you kind of set yourself up for failure if you talk in those terms and don't achieve it. But I think it's refreshing to hear a coach kind of be honest and say, hey, like, this is kind of what I came here to do. Mike Woodson's, I think, 63 or 64 years old. He's probably not going to be in Bloomington for, more than 7, 8 more years after this, depending on how things go. I like him embracing kind of the moment and saying, this is what we have to do. He talked Trayce Jackson-Davis and Race Thompson into coming back. He's assembled a pretty good recruiting class. So overall, I think it's refreshing to hear a coach kind of meet the expectations head on, even if it ends up, if Indiana doesn't win the Big Ten or have a deep tournament run, people are gonna look at it maybe as a failure. But I like the honesty from him.
Yeah, covering Mike Woodson now for his entire tenure as Indiana's head coach, like I feel like I've kind of just come to expect that he's not going to sugarcoat things. Like I just feel like that's kind of how he operates. Um, and so him, he's going to tell it as it is, and him saying that they're gonna, if you don't want expectations, you're not, you shouldn't be here. That to me that just seems on brand. And and I think back to back when Trace Jackson Davis first recommitted to Indiana before last season. So when Mike Woodson had just gotten hired, and like Mike Woodson straight up saying like, I want him to come back. Like I'm fighting for him to come back. There, some coaches would be like, I want what's best for him. We want, but he was pretty obvious and like he's gonna be our best player. Like we want him to come back. I want him to come back. So, I think that's one thing that I think I kind of appreciate about Mike Woodson is that he's, obviously there's some things that he's not going to go into full depth on, but like he's more often than not just going to say things as they are and without a filter. So I know there's definitely some verbiage and different words that we've heard a lot get over the hump and stuff. But no, I appreciate his honesty.
So if things do go right for Indiana this season and they do win the Big Ten or contend for the Big Ten, can you point to one or two things in your mind that have to go right in order for that to happen? Is it as simple as 3-point shooting? Is it becoming even better defensively? They had the best defense last season in the Big Ten in Woodson's first year. I think the expectation is they'll be really good defensively again. But I'm just curious in your mind, if we're having this same conversation in early March and the Big Ten regular season's over, Indiana has either won the Big Ten or is in the mix for the Big Ten championship going into the last couple games. What will have gone right specifically for Indiana to achieve that?
For me, the first one is shooting, and that's obviously the glaring one. But that's a question of when we saw Tamar Bates shoot at the Hoosier Hysterics event. I mean, his shot looked really good. Granted, there was really no one guarding him for the 3-point contest, but it looked really good. So can he be a guy that can step up? Can Miller Kopp be, the shooter that Indiana needs him to be? He kind of had an up and down season last year in his first at Indiana. But, I think something that we take for granted a little bit is that Parker Stewart took a fair amount of criticism last year. But he was a really good 3-point shooter last year for all the criticism he took. So that's something that Indiana is going to have to fill. So, can Jalen Hood-Schifino, shoot well from beyond the arc? I know that, he should be able to facilitate for others and get others good shots, but can he also make shots himself? Can Trey Galloway make a good enough clip to keep defenders honest? I don't think he needs to become a dead-eye shooter, but can he do enough so defenders can't clog the lane? Because I think that's when you get in a lot of trouble of where you can start collapsing on Trace Jackson Davis, and then Indiana's offense just kind of gets one-dimensional. The other thing for me is just closing out games. I mean, there were so many times last year where Indiana had a lead late. They let it slip away. I look at the game at Iowa. I think one of the biggest ones was against Rutgers that kind of really felt like it deflated Indiana's NCAA tournament hopes at the end of the season before they finally go on to the Big Ten tournament, but and turn it around a little bit. But I think of like who can be the guys that are going to settle Indiana in those closing moments of the game. Who can you hand the ball to and get a bucket? Who can you trust to lock down someone on defense? I think it just felt like when you have all of those games where Indiana was so close to winning and didn't win, and those built up by the end of the season, it felt like maybe Indiana was farther away from being a really good team than they were. And I think what the Big Ten tournament did was validate that Indiana was really close in all those games, and that it maybe took a play or two for them to flip those results. And it made that gap closer to where, or the gap between the team Indiana was and being a really good team. It made it feel a lot closer when what they did in the Big Ten tournament. But I think just closing out those games and being able to, have that kind of clutch gene to me is something that might be really big.
For me, I've always thought, and I think Indiana's program really this is held true. Having a great point guard is pivotal if you're going to be competitive in the conference race or have a chance to make a deep tournament run. You look back at Indiana's last team that won the Big Ten. They had Yogi Ferrell. He was a senior that really kind of put the team on his back. Obviously one guy can't do it all, but in Xavier Johnson now, Indiana has, its best point guard since Yogi Ferrell. I wouldn't put him in the same conversation as Yogi, who is historically one of the better point guards to ever put on the Indiana uniform. But Xavier Johnson down the stretch last season was as impressive as any guard in the Big Ten. Tyler, it's been a tumultuous offseason, obviously, for Xavier Johnson. Credit to him at Media Day last month. He took all the questions head on. He had a smile on his face, and he definitely seemed like he had learned some lessons from the offseason and realized that he's got to be a different guy in terms of his leadership. Do you think, both from a leadership perspective and in terms of his on-court production and his consistency, that we will see a more mature Xavier Johnson in his final season of college basketball?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what Indiana is going to need to have. When you just look at what he was able to do towards the end of last season, the game really changed when he was playing at a high level, and especially when he got in those pick and roll situations with Trayce Jackson-Davis, it felt almost like an NBA style type of offense where they were just going pick and roll, and he would either drive to the basket or lob it up to Trayce Jackson-Davis. But I think you could really see the difference in Indiana from when earlier in the season he was playing inconsistently toward the end of the season when he was playing some of his best basketball, that just how much he made everyone better. And I know Mike Woodson said that he probably caught more heat than anybody else from Mike Woodson on the team. And that's because, I had asked about last year of like, what does he said he demands a lot of his point guards. Like, he wants the point guard to be someone that knows when to get the ball to other guys, knows when to take shots for himself. If someone is shooting really well, keep getting them the ball. Like, there's a lot, I think, more that goes into the point guard position that at least that Mike Woodson wants than people realize. It's not as simple as going out there and, passing it and then setting a screen. And like, there's just a lot more that goes into playing the position. So I think, he's gotten to the point now, enough time playing under Mike Woodson that, seems like he understands really what is asked and needed of him. And I think that, that's going to be huge for him. And that's I think, like you mentioned, is what Indiana really needs.
One thing I asked Mike Woodson about it at Media Day, and I think I asked Trayce about it as well, was 3-point shooting by Trayce Jackson-Davis. Kind of a two-part question, just your opinion on this. One, do you think we'll actually see Trayce Jackson-Davis take 3-pointers this season? And two, depending, kind of your answer on the second part of this, it kind of depends on what you say in the first, but do you think it matters at all that he does that for Indiana's team success this year? I think personally, if he wants to be an NBA prospect that has a chance to be drafted, he's going to have to take some at least mid-range shots, maybe some 3-pointers, because look at a guy like Hunter Dickinson, what he did last season. As a freshman, he didn't make a single 3-pointer. I think last year he stepped out and made over 20. It kind of changed the way you have to guard him, right? Because you have to account for him on the perimeter. You have to account for him everyone on the court. With Trayce, he's not a stationary player. He never has been, but you kind of know where he's going to be on the floor getting his points. And I think from an NBA perspective, it's definitely important. But the other thing I wonder is just from an Indiana winning games perspective, how important is it? So what are your overall thoughts on Trayce's 3-point shooting going into the season? Is he going to take more? And do you think it matters for Indiana's success if he does?
I remember saying last season that, like, the way Hunter Dickinson had transformed his game was what Trace Jackson Davis needed to do last season in terms of being able to step out and shoot. And that's what I felt like a lot of people were hoping for he'd be able to do. And, obviously Trace didn't really show that, and Hunter Dickinson did. I still think that could be kind of the blueprint for what Trace could do. I don't think he needs to shoot threes. I think he could, but I think just the mid range is good, like much more important. Whether it be the mid range or 3-pointer, I think one of those two. Of just he doesn't need to become a sniper. I think that has become obvious. Like he doesn't need to be taking 5, 6 ones from deep because he's just so dominant inside that just keep the defense honest. Like if they have to put a hand out and close out on him from the free throw line extended or the elbow, then he can pump fake, take 1 dribble or 2 dribbles, and that's an easy dunk. So it's just being able to add more dimensions to his game. And then, in that same situation, if they don't put a hand up and they stay in the lane, if he can pop that and knock it down, that's another easy too. So I think he'd almost become unguardable in the college game if he can do that. So, I don't think it's about him taking a high volume of shots. I think it's just him making sure the defense knows that he can make them and keeping them honest. And I think, that would be big for him, both in his pursuits of playing professionally and as well as Indiana, of just keeping that floor spacing, keeping guys out of the lane. I think that would open up more driving lanes for Jalen Hood-Schifino and Xavier Johnson, for Trey Galloway, those guys that kind of like to slash through the lane. If you don't have someone that can just camp in the lane, a lot, or, near the lane, that's going to open up the entire offense. And then I think it's about, and that will open up 3-point shots too, because then, I think it just opened up the whole offense really. But I think one thing Mike Woodson mentioned is that, Indiana had a lot of good shots last season and they just didn't make them. And if Indiana can keep the floor open and get more of those shots, now it's just about making them, and so no, yeah, I think that's kind of how I see it from Trace's perspective as far as him extending his game.
In terms of the team 3-point shooting, you mentioned Parker Stewart is no longer on the team. He was their best 3-point shooter last year, but really that was all he did from an offensive perspective. Going into this season, Miller Kopp, I think Indiana needs him to be more consistent in terms of making 3-pointers and also just being able to, take a couple dribbles maybe and make a pull-up jump shot. I'm not saying that Miller Kopp needs to be a double-figure scorer, but he needs to be a guy that, 7 or 8 points a game reliably and kind of, Mike Woodson's been pretty high on his defense and kind of what he brings from a leadership perspective. But where is the 3-point shooting going to come from on this team? Is it going to be Tamar Bates and Hood-Schifino? Xavier Johnson was 38% last year, but that's not the bread and butter of his game. And so I wonder just in general, who are going to be the guys that Indiana can consistently look to make 3-pointers. And I don't know that there's a clear cut answer for that right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. And maybe it's a case of Indiana has to do this collectively. Maybe there's not going to be one guy that can just go crazy from deep. And I don't know what Devontae Green's 3-point percentage was, but he was a guy that could just absolutely catch fire on any given night. So, maybe Indiana doesn't have that. Maybe Indiana needs to have a variety of guys that can, hit it on a consistent clip, but maybe not catch fire like Devontae Green would. But, I think, can someone like, maybe a little under the radar, like can someone like Anthony Leo step up? CJ Gunn, those are 2 names that, I don't know how much people expect them to play going into the season. But is there someone maybe under the radar that can fill that role and come in and maybe give 10 to 15 minutes a game and be able to knock down shots, or at the least be a threat, someone that the defense is going to respect to knock down shots. And obviously that comes with making shots. So, can Caleb Banks be someone like that? And, those are the younger guys. Anthony Leal isn't, but yeah, I just look at it as like, is there beyond the Tamar Bates, Jalen Hitch, the guys that you would expect to be playing a lot of minutes? Is there someone else that you can kind of find that could find their way into the rotation as being someone that can provide, maybe just come off the bench, provide a spark, Not the one case I look at is when Anthony Leal came off the bench at Wisconsin his freshman season and knocked down those threes. Like, can someone do that? Can someone come in and provide that energy, hit some 3-point shots? Doesn't need to be anything fancy, but simple. Just come in, fill that role, and that's all. I think Indiana. That would be a huge, huge step for Indiana.
Big Ten Media Day is next week in Minneapolis. I think the Big Ten will later this week come out with its preseason all-league team. I think it'll be 10 players, and looked like on the women's side that what they announced today was the top 5 projections in the conference standings. Usually it's past couple of years, I don't think they've released anything at all, and before that it was 3. I know there's an official unofficial media poll that I participate in every year. Had to send my ballot in for that. I think that'll come out next week. But Indiana being picked by a lot of the preseason magazines, preview guides, whatever you want to call them, to win the Big Ten. Tyler, I'm curious from your perspective and following the league now as closely as you have the last couple of years and looking ahead to this season, who are, in your mind, Indiana's top competitors in terms of the league race this year? It feels as wide open as it's ever been, but there's got to be some teams that you have in mind that could challenge the Hoosiers for the Big Ten crown.
I like Illinois a lot. They had a lot of guys leave. They had Kofi leave, Andre Curbelo, Alfonso Plummer, but they bring in some really good transfers. Terrence Shannon, Matthew Meyer. They bring in Sky Clark, a freshman. So they have a lot of talent. I think it's just going to be a matter of if they can, put it all together. I like Michigan too, with Hunter Dickinson coming back. They have Jalen Llewellyn, transfer from Princeton. They bring in Joey Baker, transfer from Duke. So I like what Juwan Howard has there. I feel like those two are kind of the other two teams that stand out to me. I think Michigan State as well. They had Max Christie leave, but you still have AJ Hogarth coming back. So I wouldn't count out Tom Izzo as well, but I guess those are the teams that kind of first come to mind for me.
One team that I don't feel a lot of people are talking about, and it won't be a team that many folks listening to this podcast want to hear about, Purdue. They lost a ton, obviously, with Travion Williams and Jaden Ivey being gone, but they bring back Zach Edey. And I feel like with what Matt Painter does from a system perspective, he's going to be able to plug some guys into different spots. If they can figure out the point guard position, I think with the mismatch that Edey creates in the paint, they're going to be a good offensive team. And they've got some guys, I think, that are going to get better going into this year. I think they're another team that I'll be keeping an eye on, along with Rutgers, Ohio State, Iowa, Wisconsin. To a degree, those teams I think all have question marks, but that's the beauty of the Big Ten race this year. It's going to be very intriguing, I think, to watch, because there's no, Indiana may be picked as the team to beat, but this isn't like some seasons that we've seen in the past where there's a clear-cut team or two that's head and shoulders above the rest. I think schedule is going to come into play in a big way. Who has the easiest Big Ten conference schedule could very much determine who wins the regular season crown this year. So I feel like we say this every year. The Big Ten is going to be a grind for every team that's in the mix, and it's going to be tough to win away from home. And I'm just looking forward to seeing how the conference race plays out, and just excited to have a season where we're talking about Indiana being a team that's going to at least be in the conversation. I want to move to Hoosier Hysteria, which is a couple days away. Tyler, this event obviously is put on for recruits first and foremost, fans as well. It's a free event. This year they've added a concert afterwards with G Herbo, the Chicago platinum selling rapper. Generated a lot of buzz. I'm just curious, just in terms of Hoosier Hysteria in general. You're a student still at IU. You've been to this before. What's kind of your general impressions of the event? And what I feel like, and this isn't to be critical in any way of Hoosier Hysteria. I feel like every year it's kind of something everyone looks forward to, and it's uh, hyped up. And I'm not saying it's a bad event or anything like that, but sometimes as was the case last year, didn't see a scrimmage, and it kind of felt maybe like a little bit of a letdown. I like the idea of bringing in, a performer, somebody to kind of maybe get a little bit more excitement in the building, and maybe get some younger fans to turn out. But just in general, Hoosier Hysteria as an event, Tyler, what do you look forward to the most about it every year, and what are just your general impressions of the event overall?
Um, yeah, that's a good question. I think I think Hoosier Hysteria kind of is what it is, and I know that might be a little cop out, but like, I think that, I mean, you're gonna get the just the kind of skill competitions. I would assume that's what they've done the last few seasons, at least since I've been here. I mean, we already kind of saw that at the Hoosier Hysterics thing, so I guess it won't really be. It might not be anything necessarily new, but I do applaud the program for trying to modernize it in a way of getting a rapper. And I'm honestly, I think the most excited, or the thing that I'm most excited for about it is just seeing the dynamic in the building when G Herbo comes out to perform. Like, I I have a feeling, and I might be wrong, but like, if a majority of the crowd stays, a lot of people might have no idea what's going on. Like who is like this performer? What is going on? And then they'll, like, the other 25% of like the students might just be going like crazy, like excited. So I'm excited just to see like what the dynamic in like Assembly Hall is for that. But no, but I think that's good to modernize it. I think that kind of goes along with the having the pro day of just like, you know, Indiana trying to continue to take step forwards and what can help them recruiting wise, and just kind of modernizing the program. I'm curious, who, if they have a performance again next season, who is on your short list to have on there?
You're asking the wrong guy because I don't know what. Like I said, this is a recruiting event. I think it's important that we, I think fans, and when I posted the G Herbo was going to be the artist that was there, on our Facebook page and different channels, there's obviously a segment of fans who are older and don't know who he is, and kind of don't maybe they would say, why can't we have X, Y, and Z? And I think that's why it's important to acknowledge that this is a recruiting event, and it's not necessarily being done to entertain the fans. It's being done to entertain the players first and foremost, and the recruits that are going to be in attendance. And I think if you follow the program, want the program to do well, you want to do anything possible to kind of, like you said, modernize the event and get people excited about it. So I couldn't tell you, Tyler, you probably have a power rankings of who maybe they could get next year to kind of take it up another notch. I'm curious from you, do you think this is going to, bring more students, like IU students, to the event? I mean, I think there's been a decent showing usually of students, but it's usually a good mix of fans that come from around the state and people that maybe don't get a chance to go to a regular season game for whatever reason. It's free to get in, so it's maybe a little, it's obviously easier to go to something like this. But I'm curious, do you think this kind of moves the needle with students on campus and maybe gets more of them interested in Hysteria? I noticed that they invited students to start lining up at noon, so I'll be curious to see how that works out, and if they get any takers on that. Do you think this brings more students to Hysteria?
I don't think it hurts. I don't think it would hurt. Like, I don't know what percentage of the IU student population is like a big G Herbo fan. Like, personally, I think I don't think I think he's fine. Like, I don't really listen to his stuff that much, but I know that, he does have a following that's a pretty good size. So I think for when you're looking for appealing to, people college age, having him is not gonna, I don't think, drive anyone away. I think at the least it'll bring some more people in. It's a free concert, so if people aren't have anything to do better to do on a Friday night, I don't think that hurts. So yeah, I guess that's what I have to say. I also would put in there too that it seemed like, I can't remember it, but it seems like Hoosier Hysteria, I might be wrong on this, that there hasn't been a home football game like at the same time as Hoosier Hysteria. So I don't know how, maybe that's happened in the past, but at least, as far as I can remember. So I don't know. And the game is at 12 on Saturday. And for me, from a covering things perspective, it's just going to make for like a busy 15 or whatever, 18 hours. So I don't know if that will either deter people from coming out to Hoosier Hysteria, knowing that they're going to be getting up to do whatever before the game against, Michigan, or if people are, have given up on the football season. I don't know. But anyways, I think that's just something to also take into account. I guess since it's homecoming, there might be more people in town, so that might help in terms of turnout. But
so we don't talk about football in this podcast, obviously. Don't cover it on Inside the Hall, but you've covered this team this season so far. Feels to me like a pretty pivotal season for Tom Allen, just in terms of getting back some of the momentum that they had a couple of seasons ago. I mean, is this salvageable at this point in terms of this season? Is there any hope for a bowl game appearance? I mean, I feel like in college football in general, and like I said, I don't cover college football, but I follow it to the degree that I know that there's so many bowl games that basically, if you're a competent team, you're going to make a bowl game. And it feels like Indiana is not on track to make one. I'm just curious, do you see any path here for, a bowl appearance for Indiana, or is this season kind of spiraling in the wrong direction? And maybe after Saturday, when Michigan comes in, a lot of people are going to start tuning it out and say, with Hysteria the night before, it's time to start looking towards basketball season.
Yes, I think it's salvageable, but it's a very difficult situation. They're going to have to do a lot of things right to turn things around. I think the first 3 games of the season, very flawed, but they went 3-0, and they put themselves in a favorable position moving forward. Just in terms of the trajectory of the season, can they make a bowl game? The last 2 games, I think, have really turned things sour. And to me, it's like last season, things just spiraled really badly, and Indiana really couldn't do anything to stop it. And to me, it feels like it's starting that spiral again. And the question now is, can Indiana stop it? And you have Michigan coming to town. That's that's a difficult ask to try to stop the spiral. Maryland next week, and Maryland is pretty good this season. And I think that's, to me, the Maryland game is one that if Indiana loses, the season is almost, I would say, unsalvageable. That's one that you have to win. If they lose that, to me, it's like you're going, you still have to play Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State, who Michigan State isn't as good this season, but it's still at Michigan State. So I feel like we're at the beginning of the spiral stage. And Indiana needs to stop the bleeding like really quickly if things are going to turn around.
Tyler, always good to have you on the show. We're, like I said at the top of the show, thrilled that you're getting an opportunity at the Indy Star this year. I think it's going to be great for you, obviously great for them to have your writing on their platform. I would encourage everybody to listen to the show to continue reading everything that Tyler puts out there. He does an excellent job. And like I said, we're still going to have you on the show here this season from time to time. We're looking forward, obviously, to the start of the season. As far as Podcast on the Brink goes, like I said at the beginning of the show, took some time off this summer and then a longer break based on the COVID situation, and didn't really want to put you guys through episodes listening to me cough and sound miserable there. So back to full strength now, looking forward to the season ahead. The show will be back on a more regular schedule now with the season upon us, looking to go back to 1 episode per week. So thanks for sticking with us, and we will talk to you again soon on another episode of Podcast on the Brink.